I'm Max.
I'm Andy.
Welcome to Breakdown,
the podcast series that breaks down all the latest crime and punishment news, but it does so with a twist.
Okay, so over the past couple of weeks, there's been quite a lot of coverage, debate on telly, social media, in the papers about a well-known topic, well-covered topic of knife crime. Now, this is due to, unfortunately, there was the tragic murder of Eliane Andam, a 15-year-old schoolgirl, a couple of weeks ago. And what this has done is sort of reignited some of the sort of conversations around knife crime following a sort of long trend. So we're going to kick off by going to always a treat, Piers Morgan, to set a bit of context.
Look at the Piers Morgan nonsense. We spend a lot of time in this country wringing our hands about American gun violence. How can this be happening in 2023? We ask repeatedly, tragedy after tragedy. Why does it seem like nothing ever gets done? Well, guns aren't widely available in Britain, but knives are. And we increasingly have a deadly and terrifying recurring problem of our own. Last week, 15-year-old Eliane Andam was stabbed to death at a bus stop in Croydon, London. She was just trying to get to school. Last week, there were two other stabbings in that one tiny corner of London. And yes, clearly the capital has a specific and serious problem with knife crime. It's not just London. A 16-year-old boy was stabbed to death in Luton last week. 5 teenagers were wounded in 2 shocking knife attacks there on the same day. This weekend, there was a triple stabbing in Halifax. 2 young people are dead. One 21, the other just 19. 2 men were stabbed to death in Leeds. Barely a day passes without more of this bloodshed. And this is the kind of response we get every time.
My number one priority, and the thing that keeps me up at night, is the safety of Londoners.
So it's not just about policing, it's not just about stop and search, that's fantastically important. It's also about wrapping your arms around the kids and putting them on the right track.
The death of anyone through an act of violence is an appalling tragedy.
I want to say how shocked and saddened I am that 3 people have lost their lives.
Okay, so that was Piers Morgan, and he was doing what I believe Piers Morgan is great at, which is bringing an issue to the table and really sensationalising it. I don't know whether you agree with that, but I also think part of him putting the politicians on that clip was to almost insinuate that their words of compassion towards these incidents was just words and actually had no kind of context to it, or they're clueless about how to address this particular issue. But of course, Piers has got all the answers. So I think, that for me is interesting. I don't know what you observed from that short clip.
I think you're right. I think Piers Morgan is a prime example of it. But I think the media just more broadly do a good job of like sensationalising and dramatising these sorts of things. It would be quite easy watching that clip to be sucked in to believe the idea that there is a sort of endemic problem of knife murders, of youth knife murders, which undoubtedly there is a problem around youth violence and knives. However, it being presented as this sort of acute problem isn't the full story, is it?
No. Well, if we look at some of the Home Office statistics, what we can find is, in terms of homicide incidents, in 1977, as you can see on the screen here, the percentage of knife crime or sharp objects used for homicide was around 32%. And as we stand here now, it's around 40%. So you have seen an increase in homicidal incidents use of knife. But I mean, how significant that is when you hear Piers Morgan talk about it, it's like, well, it's going through the roof. And it's something that we need to talk about, because if you've seen an increase in any kind of violent crime or any specific incidents that we need to be addressing, we probably need to talk it through. But I suppose some of the things there are lots of things that we could talk about, in my opinion, that lead towards children and adults being involved in knife crime, but we tend to respond like in a sensationalist way to the tip of the iceberg, in my view.
And that's an important point, what you said about the adults. So it's true, if you look at over the last decade, that knife crime has been increasing with dips here and there. COVID dipped, and now it's starting to increase again.
But that's an important point, because what they say is it's a year-on-year increase, and that can present fear. But actually, the year before that, you might have seen a drop.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when we're talking about youth violence and gang violence and the way these topics are often framed, and then drawing parallels from the knife crime statistics as a whole, it's important to remember that the overwhelming majority of knife crime is committed by people who are over 18. So I think that's just an important point, because it's quite easy to get wrapped up in this idea of youth violence and street culture, all this sort of stuff, and then draw for the bigger statistics, when actually the two things aren't the same.
Yeah, and they need separating out. And the unintended consequence in there is that we then demonise youth.
100%.
Let's just pop over to this morning, Good Morning Britain, and they had Dermot O'Leary and others talking about this. Let's see what they had to say on that.
In this abject grief, and it is so sad. And the message that you won't be safer if you carry a knife. You won't. If you carry a knife, you think it's for your own protection, then the chances of your being killed or wounded very badly, or indeed killing somebody else or wounding them very badly, go up immeasurably in terms of percentages if you carry one. But that message has been put over by police, by, endlessly. They've used photographs of young teenagers at the morgue. They've used photographs that are so horrifying that people have objected to them because they're so dramatic. Just trying to, punt home this message. Please don't carry a knife. You won't be safer. It won't be for your own protection. And somehow it doesn't get through. It never gets through.
No, I almost I almost laugh at not laugh, but I find it funny, like Vanessa saying, somehow it wouldn't get through. She's talking about the messaging from police and these pictures in the morgue, and it reminds me of like that Just Say No campaign for drugs years ago, or the sort of scared straight stuff. Why is this stuff not getting through? I mean, one of the things that I found interesting as well is that she's saying, the police are showing this, the police have messaged, are we sure the police are the right people to be engaging in these messages? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you've been around, haven't you? Some of this, when some of this work was being done, like sort of trying to get through to the youths about carrying weapons and what.
Yeah, so I suppose I joined Youth Justice in 2007, and I joined a team that were working with kids that were either at risk of going to prison or those on release from prison. So I've worked with a lot of kids that have been convicted and sent to prison for knife crimes, etc. And I think you're right. I think when I hear Vanessa talking like that, for me, it implies that the problem lies with the individuals. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't responsible for their actions by any stretch of the imagination, but that doesn't tell a full picture. So I knew when we were showing these pictures and videos of people that have been severely cut with knives and other sharp objects, it didn't respond. The shock factor that we thought it was gonna deliver didn't deliver, and that tells me a lot about what those children's lives actually look like on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, I'm going to just quickly introduce you to Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory here, and I won't go into it in too much detail. But Bronfenbrenner was an American psychologist, and he introduced this to explain to the American Congress that it's not as simple as just blaming the individual for their circumstances, because actually, as you can see from the diagram, that around the child you've got a microsystem that's made up of family members or people that child might come into contact with, and then around that you've got what he described as the mesosystem, which is the connections of those individual systems, that microsystems. And then you've got the exosystem, which is things that may influence that child's environment, but the child doesn't come into contact with. So an example might be, if you're my dad, you're not going to be my dad, but if you were my dad and you're working somewhere, if you get fired or there's something that happens in your work, it affects you and it affects me indirectly, you with me. Mm-hmm. Or board members at a school make decisions about the child, but don't come into contact with their child, but it's certainly influencing that child's environment. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the macro system, which is the kind of beliefs, values, even political decisions in a specific country. So the point about that is that there's lots of things around a child that influences that child's development. So when I worked in youth justice, for example, the things that I seen what we were doing as an intervention to improve their circumstances, if you weren't addressing those environmental factors, you end up basically just adding more adversity to the child. Now, that doesn't take responsibility away from the child, but it means that we've got to think broader than the individual child when we're working with them.
Yeah. And I think, and like the idea of like going in and educating or showing pictures to suddenly sort of change behaviour implies that the young people that are receiving that have got hold all the cards. You know, like they've got the agency to make to just make I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or even that, that's all right then. So I'll stop the adversity, the trauma, the poverty, the social exclusion. I'll do, Kushti, thank you for showing me that picture. I'm no longer going to be involved in all this environmental stuff that's fueling my behaviour.
Yeah.
Overall take.
I think it's a multifaceted thing. I think it's, working with teenagers to kind of get to the root of what it is that they're feeling. One of the things that somebody once said to me that really seemed to make sense was potential. If you feel you have potential in life, if you feel there's a possibility you might go on to have an interesting career, you might fall in love, you might have a great life, then you're much less likely to get caught up in drugs or knives or guns or any of those things. But if you feel you have no potential, you feel you've got nothing to lose. You don't value your own life because you think you're not going to go anywhere, nothing's ever going to happen that's worth living, and you don't value anyone else's either. And I've been told by many people who work in this field their whole lives long, usually because they're involved personally, and usually because they're absolutely broken and they don't want the same thing to happen to other families. It's about potential, unleashing the appreciation that really you're young and you could do anything. It is open to you.
Okay, so it's Vanessa, isn't it? On Good Morning.
Vanessa.
Yeah, Good Morning Britain. I mean, I can only start by saying I have got absolutely no idea what qualifies that woman to speak to the public. There's millions of people probably that tune into that show, and I think it's clearly obvious to me, with somebody with lived experience of going through the criminal justice system to the point of prison, which we've already explained, 15 years of working in youth justice, which gives me a bit of insight into kind of the things that young people are facing out there in the communities. And to hear her speak like that about this particular group of people just demonstrates to me that she is so abstract. She's so, she's got so much distance away from the actual issues on the ground, that I just find it interesting that she's got the platform to speak to people about these particular issues. I don't know what your thoughts are on that when you hear it.
No, definitely. And I think the sort of the catch up, guns, drugs, knives, everything everything in there. What I mean? But no, I agree, and I think talking about feelings and potential of if people could feel like they could fall in love and all that. I think it's not funny. So I don't mean to laugh, but it's the way it's the way she spoke about it that it's almost humorous. Yeah. No, you're right. And this idea that if people could just unlock potential or find potential that's in them, as if this potential is existing within a vacuum, if people could just try hard enough and access it. What she's talking about a demographic or groups of people or whatever when she's saying that stuff that are existing, like you said about the environment, about the environmental systems, things that are existing in conditions or in environments that mean that what she views as potential might not necessarily be accessible. And I think and then to say that people must not deem themselves as having potential because they're not operating in the same system or the same sort of way that you deem to be acceptable is just a sort of a privileged gaze.
No, I mean the other bit to add to that is that where is she drawing the link between somebody feeling that they don't fit or that they don't have potential to somebody that takes a knife and stabs somebody else? Because there'll be loads of people that lack self-esteem, that don't feel that they have potential, that feel excluded or marginalised, and don't go anywhere near picking up a knife. I just think that reinforces the fact that I just don't think. I'm not saying everybody. These are public matters, so everybody should have a view on them. Yeah. But I just think that for me, that conversation highlighted that there was nobody in there that was going to challenge it, that had some experiences on the ground. Because for me, potential, A lot of people working in youth offending and going up in the environments we grew up in, some people's potential is, some people might say it's misguided, but it's certainly, the potential is there. They're potentially trying to become something, whether that's through gang crime or whatever, but they're still trying to obtain a goal. For the general society, it might seem like a misguided goal or the wrong goal to achieve. But the idea that they're just walking around thinking that they've got no potential, I think is completely obnoxious.
And it's a completely sort of patronising, paternalistic, victimhood way of looking at people. As if if they could just be spoken to in the right way, that that they're not, that people don't exist. I know we've said it about environment, but in conditions of inequality and youth clubs shutting down and all this sort of stuff. It just
which doesn't in my view take away agency. But going back to in the ecological systems theory that I showed you earlier, Bronfenbrenner talks about the relationship between the child and the parent being bi-directional, right? So there's still an element of biology, sociology and psychology, all that things comes in there, but there's no getting away. I know from my own lived experience, when I was addicted to heroin by the time I'd officially been left school, that was because I was excluded from school because my behaviour was so challenging. And then when I arrived into Brinsford Young Offenders Institution as a heroin addicted child, it's easy to just imply, well, we'll show you a couple of pictures of what heroin addicts might end up like and try to think that that's going to divert the kind of trajectory that I'm on. But actually what needed to be addressed is my family issues, the fact that my mum was in care, she had unmet needs, we were living in poverty. So you have to bring those two things together. You have to hold people to account for their individual decision making. But I think the overuse of sanction or interventions that are just showing somebody a picture will always fall short.
Open to you.
When you meet Jay Blades later, please talk to him about this, because he has fascinating stories to tell of his experience in the 1980s. And he talks about the culture among young men who want to be macho, who feel that actually this is part of being strong and it's what they are about. And knives obviously are part of this culture. And he has actually done work to try and help with this, to give people, as you say, hope, aspiration and purpose, and make them realize that actually it doesn't make you macho. That's not the way a real man behaves.
Okay, so they were discussing a little bit around what it means to be a man there, and an interpretation. And again, in my opinion, I think there's a conflation there between knife crime, which is the kind of the provocation that started the conversation that they're having, with then this conflation with, I would argue, probably the majority of working class boys and men, and saying that actually one fuels the other, when most lads, even if they fall into the category of what he describes as a real man, and by the way, there are 110 different ways and probably more to become a man. So we shouldn't be looking, that's almost like a middle class way of saying actually there's just one way of being a man when there isn't. That's dangerous if you go down that route, because you end up marginalising whole swathes of people that go to football or people that go to the pub, and they might not act in a middle class way. What are they, not men? The conflation between that and knife crime for me is extremely poor analysis. But what do you think? I would say actually sometimes these narratives, this commentary, can actually probably be paradoxical to trying to achieve a good outcome, because if we alienate these communities even more, they're less likely to get opportunities, unless the idea is that everybody becomes a middle class kind of profile of man.
Definitely. I think, and I think like exactly what you're saying there. And the thing is, we were talking before about messaging. Why is this stuff not getting through? And sort of trying to bang their head against the wall about it. But then in the same token, you've got Giles there, who's a sort of posh, really well-spoken, middle-class man, talking about what is and what isn't macho, and sort of delegitimising a whole sort of
pockets of society.
100%. Listen, I understand what he's saying. It goes in that sort of vein of, it's not big and hard to carry a knife and stuff like that. And I agree with that. I think most people probably would. But what he's not taking into account is exactly what you said. There's many different ways to be a man. And it links with that potential, the same thing as potential before. There are different ways to do potential. I mean, there was a sociologist called Albert Cohen, I think in the 70s, and he sort of talked about this stuff. and he called it status frustration. Now, he was talking about working class boys or boys in deprived areas and them in school, and what he was saying, like why they were delinquents, that was like a sort of word. And what he said is that they were sort of rejecting the middle class values of schooling, and their sort of hierarchies and ways of achieving status, the things that Giles and others would deem acceptable.
Yeah.
And forming their own, their own subcultures where they have their own access to hierarchies, status, realizing potential, being a man. Do you know what I mean? These sorts of things, right? Now, okay, knife crime, youth crime is that sort of the stabbings is the sort of is an acute manifestation of that stuff that is undoubtedly a problem. Yeah, like we all agree with that. But to then just delegitimize the whole pocket of society it comes from because they're not conforming with your ways of you know what I mean? If you went out and spoke to people, do you think man on the street and stuff like that are going to say, look at Giles and think, oh yeah, he's you're right.
That's my aspiration.
Yeah, he's macho.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And that's not to sort of validate, not validate, but sort of, like big up this sort of like macho thing and that, yeah. But what if again going back to messaging, they need to get in the weeds with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? They can't just. It's such a removed and middle class position to say, I don't agree with this. It's not right.
Yeah, and I would say it's in some ways when I'm hearing you speak there, I'm hearing I'm envisioning an iceberg, almost like knife crime is the tip of these kind of social issues, and what we end up talking about is all the stuff that's underneath, and then dehumanizing everybody that's living in that kind of space. And I suppose that's probably a nice way to summarize, because what we're actually saying is these things are multifaceted, but the commentary or the summary of the issues in the media can seek to almost alienate and stigmatize whole swathes of community if we're not finding a way to enable people to get involved in the conversation when they've been through these things, which is the idea of this podcast. But most importantly, we're really, really interested in your points of view and your perspectives on these issues that we're talking about. So please put your comments in the comments section. Please, so we get the algorithms going, hit the like button, subscribe with us and hit the notification button so that when we deliver content, it arrives on your device.